Some women are oceans of kindness until you stir the depths where storms have been sleeping for centuries. Her softness was not weakness. It was an invitation. But an invitation, misread or abused, becomes a doorway to something far older, far more dangerous, and far more exacting than the warmth that greeted you at first. Carl Jung warned that the feminine is not only the mother or the maiden, but also the witch, the huntress, the queen, the one who holds the power of life and death in her gaze. And when a man meets her shadow, he is no longer in the realm of charm. He is in the territory of transformation, where every illusion he clings to will be burned away. At first, she was all open hands and patient smiles. Her presence had that rare, almost forgotten quality of making a man feel as though he had been found rather than hunted. She listened with a kind of attention that makes a man believe he is speaking into the very heart of the world. Her softness was a balm to the frayed parts of him, a warmth he did not yet realize he would take for granted. Because the truth is, a man unused to depth mistakes the still waters for something shallow, not knowing that what is still is often what is most unfathomable. Jung spoke of the anima, the inner feminine within a man's psyche, as a force that both guides and destroys, depending on how consciously he engages with it. When he meets a woman who embodies his anima, he feels magnetized, drawn into a gravity he cannot name. But if his own inner world is unexamined, if he has avoided the work of meeting his own shadow, he will try to possess her softness without understanding its price. He will drink from her light without noticing that he is draining her. It becomes the soil for his projections, his need to be mothered, his desire to be admired without earning it, his fantasy that a woman's love is unconditional and endlessly forgiving. But the feminine, in its true form, is not a perpetual healer of wounds she did not inflict. She is a mirror, and mirrors eventually demand that you face yourself. For a time, she let him believe that the way he was treating her would not awaken anything dangerous. She absorbed, she forgave, she explained, until the explanations became a kind of slow poison in her own veins. The alchemy was already happening beneath the surface. The gentle tide was pulling back, and what would be revealed in its absence would not be the same woman he thought he knew. When the feminine shadow stirs, it does not roar immediately. It begins as a subtle withdrawal, an invisible boundary forming where there used to be none. She no longer laughs at the jokes that are half insults. She no longer explains away the silences that cut deeper than words. She starts seeing him not through the haze of who he could be, but with the stark clarity of who he is choosing to remain. And when that shift happens, something primal in a man's nervous system feels it. The loss of the ground he thought he owned. This is the point where many men panic. They feel the warmth turn into distance and mistake it for coldness, when, in truth, it is a sacred reclaiming of the self. They push, they provoke, they try to trigger the old softness back into life. But the woman who has met her own shadow no longer plays in the light alone. She has seen the underworld inside herself, walked through the fires of betrayal, and come back with eyes that no longer plead for recognition. Jung would say that the shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply the part of us we refuse to see. For the feminine, the shadow often holds the rage she was taught to suppress. The boundaries she was told were unladylike. The power she was conditioned to believe was dangerous to men. When she claims it, she stops negotiating for her worth. She stops mistaking endurance for love. She stops pouring herself into vessels that leak. And for the man who has relied on her softness to shield him from his own inadequacy, this is a shattering. Because when she turns that gaze, the one that once soothed, into a mirror for his unconscious, he is confronted with the truth. He never loved her as she was. He loved the reflection of himself he saw in her. That reflection is gone now. In its place is a woman who will not be swayed by apologies that cost nothing, by promises with no spine, by the desperate performance of change without the substance of it. You may think you are ready for such a woman until you stand before her shadow. In her presence, you are no longer able to hide in the half-light of your own untested character. She will see the cracks in the mask, the fear beneath the bravado, the boy who learned to seduce so he would never have to be seen. And she will not be cruel, but she will be unyielding. Her love is no longer a refuge for the part of you that refuses to grow. The tragedy for many men is that they meet her shadow only after exhausting her light. They imagine they can summon the softness again by returning to the habits that first drew her in. A kindness here, a gesture there. But the alchemy has already changed her. Once a woman has met her shadow, she can never unsee it. The softness remains, but it is no longer available on demand. It is reserved for those who can meet it without devouring it. In the language of Jung, this is individuation, the integration of all parts of the self, both light and dark, into a whole. For the woman, it means she no longer fears the parts of herself that can say no, that can walk away, that can look love in the eye and refuse it, if it comes at the cost of her soul. It is the death of the good girl persona and the birth of something vast, ancient, and ungovernable by anyone but herself. For the man, the only way to stand in the presence of such power without being destroyed by it is to do his own shadow work, to meet the parts of himself that want to control rather than connect, to manipulate rather than be vulnerable, to take rather than co-create. Without this work, her shadow will feel like punishment. With it, her shadow will feel like initiation. This is the truth few speak out loud. The feminine shadow is not here to destroy men, but to destroy the illusions men have about themselves. The pain of meeting it is the pain of being stripped of the lies you have lived in. And if you can survive that nakedness without running, without attacking, without shrinking back into the comfort of your old habits, you will meet her, truly meet her, for the first time. Not just the softness, but the wholeness. Not just the light, but the night sky it belongs to. Once the shadow has risen, the entire dance between them changes. He is no longer dealing with the woman who would cushion his ego before telling him the truth. Her words now have an edge, not of cruelty, but of precision. They land in the center of his defenses, cutting through the fog he built to protect himself from seeing too clearly. This is not anger without direction. It is clarity without compromise. For the unprepared man, it feels like loss. Loss of control, loss of influence, loss of the softness that once bent toward him like sunlight. But for the awakened woman, it is the recovery of something stolen long before he arrived. Her unshakable sovereignty. The softness that remains is no longer an endless resource to be mined. It is an offering to be earned. And when a man realizes he no longer has automatic access to it, he must either rise to meet her or retreat into the familiar safety of shallower waters. Jung described this confrontation with the shadow as a moment of psychic death. Something in the man must die, the part of him that feeds on unconscious admiration, the part that prefers fantasy over truth. And the death is painful because the ego will fight to survive, even when survival means staying small. But there is no growth without that burning away. Without it, the man will see her shadow as a threat to be escaped, rather than a doorway to his own liberation. She knows this. She has seen men run from it before. She has seen them talk about wanting a strong woman until her strength required them to step into their own. She has seen them crave depth until they realized depth meant drowning the boy inside, who still wanted to be rescued. And so, she does not chase. She understands that the shadow does not beg to be accepted. It simply exists, and it waits. If you, as a man, stand in that moment, know this: her shadow is not against you. It is against the parts of you that betray yourself. It will strip away the excuses, the half-promises, the performances. It will force you to decide whether you will remain a spectator in your own life or enter the arena, unarmored, ready to be reshaped. If you cannot endure the discomfort of that transformation, you will lose her. not because she is punishing you, but because she refuses to be complicit in your stagnation. Her power, now unhidden, is not loud in the way you might expect. It is quiet, still, deliberate. It moves with the gravity of someone who has nothing left to prove. That is the most disorienting part for the man who was once the center of her attention. Realizing he is no longer her axis, she has reclaimed herself as her own center, her own orbit, her own sun. If he remains, it will not be because she needs him to hold her together. It will be because he has chosen to stand beside someone who will never again make herself smaller to fit him. This is where the work of the masculine truly begins. Not in conquering, not in charming, not in winning her back to the state she once was in, but in meeting her as an equal force. The Stoics knew this too. Seneca spoke of the discipline of mastering oneself before seeking to master the world. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If a man's inner world is painted with fear, control, and avoidance, her shadow will reveal every shade of it. But if he has the courage to examine it, to repaint it with truth, humility, and courage, then her power will not eclipse him. It will illuminate him. And yet, many will turn away. Because to meet a woman's shadow is to confront your own. It is to stand before the truth that love is not sustained by comfort, but by mutual growth. The warmth of her embrace is still there, but now it comes with conditions that are not demands, but truths. You will meet me in the light and in the dark. You will not ask me to shrink for your peace of mind. You will not take what I give without also giving yourself in return. Some men will hear these truths and feel caged. Others will hear them and feel freed. Freed from the performance of a one-sided dynamic. Freed from the quiet rot of being half-alive. For those men, her shadow is not a warning to turn away. It is a signal that they are being invited into a love that is real, forged in the fires of truth rather than the comfort of illusion. The most dangerous misconception is that the shadow makes her cold or unloving. In reality, it makes her love sharper, cleaner, more potent. It burns away the layers of need that once blurred her vision, leaving only what is essential. When she loves from this place, it is not to fill a void in herself, but to meet the fullness in another. The man who can stand here, unshaken by her clarity, will discover that the warmth of her original softness has not vanished. It has transformed. It is no longer a gentle tide. It is a deep ocean, vast and untouchable by the trivial storms of ego. But that ocean will not hold those who thrash against its depths. It will not lower itself to shallow pools for the sake of the fearful. Her power is an invitation, but it is not an open door to anyone who happens to knock. It is a threshold, and the crossing of it requires that you leave your false selves behind. This is the juncture where the feminine and masculine, both integrated and whole, can meet without masks. It is rare. It is costly. It is the only kind of union that can withstand time, change, and truth. And for the man who rises to meet it, her shadow will no longer be something to survive. It will be the place where he learns to truly live. When a man learns to stand in the presence of a woman's shadow without shrinking, something shifts in him that is not merely romantic. It is existential. The boy who once clung to approval fades. The man who feared her silence begins to understand it. He no longer interprets her boundaries as rejection, but as an act of self-respect that demands his own. Her no is no longer a wall. It is a gate, and the key is not charm, not dominance, but authenticity. Jung's warning about the shadow was never a threat. It was an invitation to wholeness. For the feminine, her shadow is the guardian of her worth. For the masculine, meeting it is a test of his capacity to become more than his appetites. He cannot navigate this terrain with manipulation or with the boyish fantasy that love should be easy. The shadow burns illusions, and in doing so, it exposes the raw materials of what is real. In the beginning, he may mistake her reclaiming for withdrawal. The warmth that once flowed without a condition is now measured, not because it has diminished, but because it has matured. She knows the cost of offering it too freely. She has learned that not all who seek comfort are willing to reciprocate it. She has faced the truth that some who love her light will resent her when that light illuminates their own shadows, and she will not dim herself for their comfort ever again. If he is wise, he will see this shift not as a loss, but as a recalibration. A woman who has met her shadow has nothing to prove, nothing to perform, nothing to sell. Her love becomes a gift, not a negotiation. Her presence is a choice, not an obligation. To stand beside her is to be chosen every day, but only if he is also choosing himself. The Stoics spoke of amor fati, the love of fate, to embrace not just the pleasant parts of life, but the difficult ones as necessary for growth. The man who can meet her shadow must adopt this philosophy. He must accept that her truth will sometimes sting, that her clarity will sometimes unsettle him, that her refusal to tolerate mediocrity will sometimes force him to examine the parts of himself he has been avoiding. This is not cruelty, it is the discipline of love. And yet, there is tenderness in this discipline. Her shadow does not come to destroy love, but to preserve it. The woman who has claimed her darkness knows that love without truth is nothing more than dependency dressed in romance. She will not allow herself to be reduced to a source of comfort for a man unwilling to grow. But for the one who stays, who faces the mirror she holds up, There is an intimacy unlike any he has known, because it is not built on illusion. He learns slowly that her stillness is not absence, but depth. That when she withdraws, it is not to punish, but to preserve her center. That when she challenges him, it is not to dominate, but to invite him into his own fullness. Her power is not the kind that competes. It is the kind that calls forth. And it calls forth only those who can answer without abandoning themselves. Jung knew the danger of resisting the shadow. What we resist, we project. What we deny in ourselves, we will inevitably resent in others. If a man refuses to meet his own hidden fears and inadequacies, he will see her power as arrogance, her independence as rejection, her boundaries as hostility. But when he integrates his own shadow, he begins to see her not as a challenge to overcome, but as an equal force to align with. This is when their connection transcends the games of power and submission. They are no longer trying to consume each other's light, nor to outmaneuver each other's darkness. They are two whole beings standing in the knowledge of their own depths, choosing to walk together, not out of need, but out of reverence. And this is where the beauty of her transformation becomes undeniable. Her shadow no longer feels like a threat to him because he has faced his own. Her power no longer triggers his insecurity because he has claimed his own. He does not mistake her detachment for indifference because he has learned the art of holding without clinging. He understands now that the woman who was once soft until he met her shadow was never truly transformed by him. She was revealed to herself, and she simply stopped hiding. The man who reaches this place sees what most never will. Her softness has not vanished, it has deepened. It is no longer a reflex born of habit or social conditioning. It is a deliberate choice. And because it is deliberate, it is infinitely more potent. Her tenderness now flows from strength, not from fear of abandonment. It is offered not to all who seek it, but to the one who can meet it without trying to own it. In this union, there is no pedestal and no subjugation. There is no endless pursuit of reassurance and no need for one to lose so the other may win. There is the quiet power of two people who have met their shadows and decided not to run. And in that quiet power, love becomes something far more enduring than infatuation. It becomes respect. The kind that survives, desires fluctuations, the kind that does not fear time. But to arrive here, both must pay the price. The dismantling of illusions. The confrontation with their own darkness. The surrender of the fantasy that love can thrive without the work of becoming whole. Many will refuse the price. Many will meet the shadow and turn away, seeking someone softer, someone easier, someone whose depths have not yet been stirred, and they will repeat the cycle until they realize that the shadow is not the enemy, it is the gateway. For the woman, there is no going back. Once she has tasted the freedom of her own wholeness, she will never again barter it for affection. She will never again mistake endurance for loyalty. She will never again confuse being needed with being loved. She will walk through life as both sanctuary and storm, offering shelter to those who come in truth, and weather to those who come in deceit. There comes a moment when the dance between the integrated feminine and the man who has endured her shadow shifts into something entirely different, something beyond the initial attraction, beyond even the tests of transformation. It is the moment when both understand that love, stripped of illusion, is not a constant flood of passion, nor a perpetual state of ease. It is the conscious decision to remain aligned even when the fire is less visible, when the days are ordinary, when the challenges are not dramatic storms, but the quiet, persistent demands of daily life. The woman who has claimed her shadow does not seek intensity for its own sake anymore. She has seen what reckless passion can destroy. She has walked away from the adrenaline of chaos, disguised as love. Her peace is now the most fiercely guarded possession she owns, and she will not trade it for anyone's inability to self-regulate. This means the man who stands beside her must also be anchored in himself. Because a love like this will not survive if one is always trying to pull the other back from the edge. The man who has survived her shadow understands this now. His ego is no longer the fragile thing it once was. Her truth does not unman him, it steadies him. Her boundaries no longer feel like obstacles. They feel like the architecture that holds their connection upright. He does not fear her independence because he knows it does not threaten his place in her life. It is the very reason her love remains fresh, unforced, unresentful. Jung might call this the sacred meeting of the animus and anima in their matured forms. The polarity remains, but it is no longer driven by need or projection. It is fueled by choice and clarity. The shadow integration means neither seeks the other to complete them, but to complement them. There is no pressure to merge into one indistinct identity. Instead, there is the joy of being distinct, yet deeply connected. In this stage, her softness returns, not as the endless, unguarded tide of before, but as something rarer and more deliberate. She offers it like an artist unveils a masterpiece, only to those who can truly see it. And because he has met his own shadow, he can see it without needing to diminish it, without fearing it will disappear if he does not control it. He understands the paradox that her softness is stronger than her fire, because it is softness by choice, not by default. There is a quiet poetry in the way she moves through the world now. She can be gentle without being submissive, generous without being drained, loving without losing herself. She can say no without guilt, and yes without fear. And because of this, every yes she gives carries the full weight of her presence. The man who walks beside her begins to embody his own version of this power. His steadiness is no longer the mask he wore to appear unshaken. It is the authentic calm of someone who has faced the internal battles and emerged intact. He does not require her to soothe the parts of him that are afraid. He can do that himself now. And because of this, her love is no longer a constant act of rescue. It becomes a mutual exchange of presence, of respect. This is where the Stoics and Jung meet, in the understanding that mastery of the self is the only foundation for enduring connection. Epictetus wrote that we cannot control external events, only our own minds. The man who has lived through her shadow knows this intimately. He no longer seeks to control her moods or reactions. He attends to his own integrity instead. And in doing so, he creates the safety in which her softness can flourish again. Yet, even here, the shadow does not disappear. It is not something to be exercised, but something to be honored. The feminine shadow, once awakened, remains as the quiet sentinel at the gates of her soul. It watches, it remembers, it protects. The man who has passed through its trials does not try to put it back to sleep. He respects it as the very thing that made her love worth having. Together, they create a kind of love that does not fear endings, because it is built on truth. If one day their paths diverge, it will not be in the chaos of betrayal or the confusion of unresolved needs. It will be with the knowledge that they met fully, without masks, and that every moment was chosen rather than clung to out of fear. For her, this is the final liberation, the realization that she does not have to choose between softness and power, between love and self-respect. She is no longer the woman who was soft until he met her shadow, as though the shadow was a turning point forced upon her. Now, the shadow and the softness coexist, inseparable, forming the whole of who she is. And for him, the liberation is just as profound. He measures it by how much of her wholeness he can honor without trying to possess. He understands now that love is not ownership, but stewardship, the privilege of tending to something that is not his to control. They stand together, not as halves seeking completion, but as sovereigns sharing a kingdom, knowing that the crown each wears was forged in the fires of their own becoming. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.